Hello everyone. Allow me to introduce you to the most frightening way to fall asleep and lull you into sweet nightmares. Mort's Bedtime Stories. This brand new app gives you a premium ad-free experience to listen to hundreds of hours of scary stories without interruptions. Simply select the story category you want, pick a story at your leisure, and let the darkness take control. Our extensive archive has currently over 2,500 original narrated stories, and it's only going to keep growing. Will you be able to listen to them all? You can also download stories while you're offline too, and keep a hold of your favorites by using the heart button. To make this experience even more spine-tingling, you can also add background music, sound effects. Perhaps you'd like to hear a storm, the rain, or the sound of a train passing by to make it even more comfortable. Not to mention, you could control both the sound of my voice and the background for optimum personal preference, as well as add fade-out timers to the stories as you drift off. The app comes with 50 stories ready for you to download and listen to anywhere you please, with 10 extra stories a day for free users and, of course, unlimited for premium. We are looking for backers to sponsor the project so that we can hit the ground running and offer even more great content within the app. We have a few cool ideas that we'd love to integrate with funding, like an inbuilt choose-your-own-adventure game, awards feature, and much more. All backers, of course, will receive an early access full version of the app, and much more, depending on your tier. Thank you for your consideration, and I hope to see you soon. Hey guys, well there you have it. The long-awaited Mortis Media app is finally ready. We have started an Indiegogo campaign to try and raise funds to just hit the ground running and really fine-tune it. The app itself is ready, but we just want to make improvements to make it even better and to pay for server space and stuff, which, costs money along with a few other bits and pieces. Any support would be incredibly gratefully received, and it would seriously mean the world to us. So yeah, there's a link in the description. I seriously hope some of you consider donating. It would really mean the world to us. We're offering some really cool perks for people who sign up. It ends on the end of the first week of November, so please give it a think and check it out. But for now, it's time to get comfortable and let the darkness take control. When I was 2 to 5 months old, my family lived in a trailer on a piece of property with an old large white house on it, built in the late 1800s. My father was born in 1917 in a small community in rural Louisiana that went bust during the Great Depression. But at one point it had a general store, train station, post office, etc. Now it's just a block, gold dust loop, amid a bunch of fields in central Louisiana. Anyway, the large white house was the doctor's house. I was born in 83. Dad was 66 when I was born. I'll be clear, he didn't believe in anything. Ghosts, aliens, nothing supernatural. If he had never seen it, it didn't exist, period. He told stories about what the town used to be like when he was young, and one of the stories was that of the doctor's wife, that she took their kid and left him. She and their kid disappeared, so the story was that she ran off. Sometime in the late 30s or so, the doctor committed suicide afterwards, and the large white house went unoccupied and was boarded up. As I said, when I was born, we lived in a trailer on that property. My dad bought another trailer and had been a carpenter back in the day, so he built a large home a couple of lots over, using the 2 trailers, and built a frame around them. Now, when I started talking, I started telling all these stories about an old man that I had all kinds of adventures with and called him my grandpa. I had no grandpa alive at the time. Parents brushed it off as an overactive imagination, and in time I forgot all about it. Years later, I'm talking to my dad after a news story about an earthquake, and he mentions feeling tremors when I was younger in our house at night, to which I replied that it was impossible, since Louisiana didn't have any earthquakes. Well, in typical old man fashion, he became agitated and swore that occasionally his bed would shake at night. Weird. Before my mother passed away, she told my sister not to live in the house with her daughters and to sell it instead because she thought something bad was there. When asked to elaborate, she said the whole time we lived there she occasionally heard voices when no one was in the house and footsteps. She was very sick and had moved out of the house, and after her and my father separated, then passed away shortly thereafter. I don't think my sister really paid much attention to what she said. She would end up moving into the house a few months later. A few years later, I'm in Texas. My sister is now living in the house where we grew up. She called me freaked the hell out, complained that she heard an old man's voice and a woman's voice arguing, and a child's voice. I roll my eyes and brush it off. Then my older brother goes over and leaves that night claiming he heard the same. So then, being the religious people they are, and I'm an atheist, they call a local pastor, and this goes on for about 2 weeks with increasing intensity. They do a blessing, and as they are finishing, my sister's dog goes berserk outside for no apparent reason, and the 3 lawn chairs on the porch are thrown into the yard with no one else on the porch. There were 4 witnesses to all of this, claiming they saw the same thing happen. I didn't witness it, but I would have certainly liked to have seen it for myself. In any case, after thinking about it and having read a lot of supernatural experiences, I think it's plausible that all these experiences are linked together. The doctor that killed himself, the missing wife and kids, my old man imaginary friend, my dad's bed shaking, and the eventual ghostly noises and occurrences. It doesn't really frighten me, but it definitely makes me really curious. My sister contacted me yesterday with news about it. So my sister gave it to her daughter, who lived in it for several years and eventually moved out, partially due to the weird stuff, but also because it was in really bad shape. Well, my niece decided to sell the land and have the house torn down because of how bad of a shape it was in. The 2 guys she hired to tear it down quit after a week. The main guy got so spooked after thinking there must be a squatter living there from the noises he heard, but never found anyone. He asked his brother-in-law to come over and help, and the brother-in-law didn't believe in any supernatural stuff either. They both heard noises, and the last day there, the door in the room they were tearing down a wall in closed by itself, and they had to use a sledgehammer to knock down the door to get out. They both ran from the house and left their tools there, and said they weren't going back in for them, and would not be returning, and that they should just burn the house down. I started my first part-time job at 16, at a place where most of my co-workers were older college people. I didn't act like a 16-year-old idiot, so I got to be friends with them, and they would invite me to parties and such. They had just moved into a new house because the rent was half of what they were paying before. I had overheard them saying they didn't like it and were looking for something else, but no one had given any specific reason as to why. I figured it was because the house was in a semi-rough shape and was located in a run-down older part of town. One evening, Dave invites me to hang out for pizza, beer, and movie night. I get over there, and Dave has already got the refreshments ready. We then pick a movie. I go to sit down on a couch that was against the back wall, but he motions for me to come to the one on the other side of the room, which faced into the open kitchen and hallway, which led to the other bedrooms. A little while into the movie, I begin to see the lights being turned off from under the cracks of the back bedroom doors. I kind of wonder why his roommates didn't come out and get some pizza or watch the film. I then hear one of the bedroom doors open and close a few times. Dave turns the TV up a little. A few minutes later, I hear people walking around in the back of the house, and Dave turns the TV up some more. A short while after that, I hear someone talking loud enough to be heard over the TV, but not enough to understand what exactly was being said. I look at Dave, and he has this weird look on his face, and he turns the TV up louder still. Then the door slams shut, the TV gets turned up some more, and finally I see movement out of the corner of my eye, and turn to look, thinking one of the roommates has come out of the back bedroom into the kitchen. No one is there, but the kitchen cabinets are now open, when moments before they had been closed. All of the hairs stand up on my arms and my neck, and I jump up. I look over at Dave and I could tell by his face he knew why I had jumped up, and I ask him what the hell is going on. Dave proceeds to tell me that they had been experiencing stuff like this since they moved in. The reason I was invited over that evening was because his other roommates had gone out of town, and Dave did not want to be alone in the house. There was also the reason why he took the couch that did not have a view of the kitchen and hallway leading to the back bedrooms. Needless to say, I left immediately, was extremely pissed about being invited into a freaking haunted house without a heads up, and about 2 months later they suddenly moved out of the house, with such speed that they left some stuff behind. It took a little prying, but Dave said he woke up, and an old woman was leaning over his bed and looking down at him. He said he screamed and raised his hands to defend himself, and she just disappeared. This happened a few years ago, and still creeps me out. Me and a good friend are watching my girlfriend's house. She has 2 dogs and we decided to stay there, as it was only going to be 5 days, so no big deal. So we did pretty much nothing the first day, ate top ramen and watched the Science Channel. We're pretty cool, I know. The house is pretty creepy. It's an older house that used to be an old speakeasy that burnt down a long time ago and was rebuilt to be the current house. I don't know if it's true. It's quite possible, it could be, that my girlfriend's dad is messing with me. But what I do know is while I was asleep, my friend woke me up and asked if I turned the oven on. Apparently it turned on by itself. It happened several times through the week, and we were rightfully freaked out. One day I go home and do stuff around the house, so I left him at the house alone. I soon got desperate texts that the dogs were freaking the hell out, and he heard heavy footsteps upstairs. Now I thought he was just milking it and being a dick and trying to mess with me, but the next day he left to go out with his girlfriend, and the same thing happened to me. But I was upstairs in the shower and I heard clear heavy footsteps and no one was home, and the dogs were freaking the hell out downstairs. I literally stayed in the shower for half an hour to build up the courage to check the house. I've told my girlfriend and she claims it's just mice. So, these mice weigh well over 100 pounds, as they were some heavy-ass footsteps, similar to a man with boots on. True story. I lived in a haunted house. It was an old farmhouse in rural Norway that had a reputation for being haunted. The house belonged to my now ex-wife's family, and no one was staying there, as it was her uncle's summer cottage, and we needed a place to stay, so we used it. It was actually very comfortable, nestled in a valley on a fjord. We brought our cat with us from the US when we moved in, and I loved it there. Everything was pretty normal for the first few months, but that's when the voices started. At first they were indistinguishable, just the muffled noises of women talking, easy enough to dismiss, but then it got more intense. One night the lights came on in the kitchen. We could smell food cooking, and there were women talking in there. Now I should note, she kind of had a nosy family that would just show up whenever they felt like it, but this was 3 a.m. I was more angry than freaked out. I got up and headed towards the kitchen, still hearing the voices, but they stopped as soon as I began to open the kitchen door. I opened it and went inside. The lights were still on, the oven was turned off but warm, and the smell of food lingered in the air. But alas, no one was there. Things started to get more sinister after that. There were screams in the cellar and the attic, usually in the middle of the night, and the cat was getting increasingly agitated as time went on, acting like she could see things that weren't there, chasing things that were invisible, hissing at the air. This led us to the event that had us note right the hell out of there. We woke up to the cat making this horrific howl/screeching noise in the living room. I go to see what's happening, and I didn't see her right away, but there she was. My white, fluffy, blue-eyed cat standing on the ceiling in complete defiance of gravity, eyes glowing red in the country moonlight and howling. My wife came out and saw this and screamed. The cat stopped howling and just stared at us. Then, the cat opened her mouth and said, "Get out," in Norwegian, in the voice of an old woman. As soon as the words were uttered, the red glow faded from her eyes and the cat fell from the ceiling on the floor, got up, and acted like nothing happened. We slept at her parents' that night and moved out the next day. That was enough. 15 years ago, my family and I were living in Madagascar, where people are pretty superstitious and always have a lot of great ghost stories. We lived in a huge and old house on the site where my parents worked. The kind with really thick walls and long corridors. We learned rather quickly that this used to be the director's house from long ago, where his wife had died from the plague or something like that. The story always varied depending on who was telling it, but everyone was positive the house was haunted. Generally speaking, the house was indeed scary. The basement was really dark and low, and there are rooms within the basement that were even darker and had white stains above the doorway shaped like skulls. The attic was kind of fun and scary, really goosebumps-looky, dusty and huge, and it covered the whole house. But there was a little dark room in there with no window, and I could just feel that I shouldn't go in. It was deep, very clear, an uneasy feeling in my stomach that I didn't want to go in there, but it was almost drawing me in, like something terrible but fascinating. The corridors were really long, so the walks at night to go to the bathroom were always terrifying. The bathroom was just in front of the stairs that climbed up into the attic, and I was always paralyzed with fear when passing it. We also did experience a few strange things. Several times my mum was home alone and saw movement behind her. Some of the windows were probably as old as the house itself, so the glass was uneven and would never give a clear reflection. It was probably nothing, right? When my brother was 9, he woke up and felt and heard someone crying over him. He said he could feel the tears, but he wasn't scared because he knew the person was nice, but simply sad. When I was 12, I felt more than once that someone was sitting on the end of my bed. I would stay paralyzed in fear, so I never dared look up. I could also hear footsteps above my room from the attic. My parents, hardcore scientists, said it was probably rats or an owl, but I was never convinced. It clearly sounded like steps. We stayed there for 5 years, and the weird stuff never stopped. Nothing truly horrifying happened, just the constant feeling of dread and unease. We're all on the science side, so not really superstitious, and try to look for reasonable explanations, but maybe the stories and the appearances of the house did get to us in our imagination. In any case, we moved out and have never experienced anything remotely like that since. When I was about 10, I watched my mum's purse slide from the kitchen counter, hover in mid-air for about 15 seconds and then slam to the ground. I can't say I remember running, as it doesn't seem like my feet touched the ground. When I found my mum outside, all I could manage was, "Mum, your purse, it fell," and a dead stare. All she replied was with, "Pick it up then, please," as she shook her head. In this same apartment to this day, as my mother still lives there, a ghost, or whatever you want to call it, drops and rolls what sounds like marbles on the ceiling. Sometimes it sounds like bowling balls, others golf. They drop from a good height, it bounces and rolls, as you would expect them to on a hard linoleum floor covering solid concrete. After a quick search online now, the likely culprit is actually water moving in the pipes apparently. I would totally jump over any explanation, to be honest. Except I have yet to hear one that explains why the hell it would follow you around from room to room, even while running down the hall to leave the apartment. I used to call the ghost Charlie, after my imaginary friend from kindergarten. Then we found out that several others would hear this anomaly, and we changed the name to Mason, as in masonry, due to the fact that he lived in the cement of the building. The building manager and the HUD had gotten numerous complaints about the issue, just pointing out that my mother and I are not the only ones, and we're convinced a ghost child is responsible. A few years ago, we moved into our house that was first built in 1941. The garage had been plastered with tons of conventional brochures and airline tickets for this guy named Ray. They were all from the 50s, 60s, and 70s. Not after moving in, I was alone in the house and walked into my bedroom when, clear as day, someone whispered in my ear, "I'm not ready yet." Yeah, creep out central. I'm pretty sure that was Ray, and have since decided he's pretty harmless. I occasionally hear someone moving around when there's no one else home. The cat is always staring at something invisible, and my daughter has occasionally told me there was someone in her room when there wasn't. Stuff doesn't move around when he doesn't seem so angry, so we just laugh about it and talk to him. My story takes place in a small Scottish town, roughly situated between the larger cities of Edinburgh and Glasgow. For context, I'm a 42-year-old female. I'm a dentist by trade and have been for the last 19 years. I mention this only to demonstrate that I'm a fairly grounded and level-headed individual who will always strive to find any rational explanation for any unusual or surprising occurrences and situations in which I may find myself. I have, however, always believed that the energy that keeps each of us alive, some may refer to this as our souls, does not and cannot dissipate the moment our bodies cease to be alive. To quote one of the laws of physics, energy can neither be created nor destroyed, only converted from one form to another. The only way to use energy is to transform energy to one form to another. Hence, I believe that the energy which makes up that age-old mystery of life itself cannot just disappear once the body's vessel dies. Which begs the question, where does it go? Now, I apologize if this sounds a little preachy, but it's what I've always rationalized the concept of ghosts or spirits to myself as. And as it stands, I believe I've had a number of what can be referred to as paranormal encounters, many of which were experienced in my childhood home. I accept that many people would disagree, but I'm guessing if you're listening to this now, we're more than likely on the same page. So here's my tale, and I hope you enjoy it. But the story doesn't begin with me. My parents bought our house as a fixer-upper when they got married 44 years ago, built in 1888. However, as a newly married couple in the 1970s, it was only just affordable. Eventually, over time, and by investing a lot of hard work, my mum and dad provided my younger brother and I with a beautiful family home full of love and many happy memories. Some memories, however, I wouldn't exactly describe as happy, but I digress. On with the story. First, let me briefly describe the house's layout. It still contained many of the original period features. Beautiful high ceilings with ornate concealing around the edges. The living room and dining area had at one point been separated by a partitioning wall, which my dad had decided to knock through, resulting in one larger room with a sort of alcove feature. At the end of the downstairs hall was a huge solid wooden door with a gorgeous antique original frosted glass window adorned with images of flowers. This door opened into a small vestibule, beyond which was the large, heavy wooden front door. The staircase still retained the original wooden and wrought iron banister. The top 4 steps curved sharply to the left, leading onto a very small landing, which was not visible from the bottom of the staircase. The upper floors of our house were much smaller than the ground floor, especially after our parents extended the property out onto the sizable back garden. This may seem like a lot of information, but it is crucial to the story that I illustrate the layout and the fact that some changes to the original house design had taken place. At the top of the stairs, only 3 rooms existed: my bedroom, my brother's, and the family room. Now, this first tale isn't paranormal of nature, but I felt worth including it nonetheless. Shortly after they were married and had moved into our house, my parents were settled into bed when the front doorbell went. It was late and the house was situated in a very quiet street, which would instantly put them on edge. Dad warned Mum to stay where she was, and as there was no peephole, he cautionedly opened the front door. On the lawn, only a few feet away, was a man, lying sprawled out and apparently unconscious. Although this would have been the mid to late 70s, Dad was quite rightly very wary of the situation, and after calling out to the man several times to no avail, he proclaimed to my mum in a loud voice that she'd best call the police. However, rather than do so, they sat and waited for a few minutes before my dad anxiously checked the figure on the lawn again, and surprise, surprise, there wasn't a soul in sight. Had Dad gone out there, he suspected that there would have been a second or third party hidden out of sight, and they may have overcome and run into the house to do God knows what. Good old Dad. Now for some tales of the encounters with the paranormal. One day, a year or so into their marriage, my mother, who happened to be pregnant with me at the time, was looking out of the kitchen window when she saw the top of a small blonde head sauntering by the window. She found it strange that she hadn't heard anyone coming up the driveway at the side of the house, as it was lined with loose stones. Growing up, I distinctly remember that you could hear everyone coming up the driveway, even the odd wandering cat or bird. Dad had dark blonde brown hair, so she felt it wasn't him, but never doubted what she'd seen. Mum went out and checked the driveway, then went into the garden where my father was working on the flower beds. There was, and still is, only one way to enter the area from the side gate, so she was both alarmed and confused to find out that Dad hadn't a clue as to what she was on about, and hadn't seen anyone at all. Poor Mum blames her hormones, yet she couldn't stop thinking about it. It was so vivid. She had seen someone for sure, and after discussing it at length with my dad, her sisters, her own mother, and well, anyone that would listen really, she eventually put it out of her head and got on with her day routines. Let me just tell you a little bit about my dear Mum. She's one of the most hard-working, kind and honest people I've ever met, and feel utterly blessed to have a mum who possesses such a temperament. She's modest to a fault, very moral. Nothing about her character is attention-seeking. She keeps herself to herself, believes that her business and affairs are her own, and never gets involved with idle gossip. She's absolutely the last person in the world to draw any unnecessary or unwanted attention to herself, and would gain nothing from inventing or embellishing a story, for any of the aforementioned reasons. Seriously, she hates attention. She hates telling this story, and she hates me telling it. So she's gonna love me for sharing it with all of you. A few weeks later, there was my mum happily getting on with housework, preparing for my imminent arrival, and she found herself cleaning out the bathroom upstairs. Then as she was vacuuming the floor, she moved out onto the landing. Remember that very small landing at the top of the curvy stairs? She glanced out behind her, actually dropped the vacuum in front, and I swear she says she nearly gave birth to me right then and there. Peering around the corner of the staircase was a young, very thin, and very pale boy with blonde hair and big, wide blue eyes, with a quizzical expression on his gaunt little face. His blanched, spindly fingers were curled around the wall at the top of the stairs, as if he were half hiding, half curious. Mum said it was like he was quietly trying to climb the stairs without being noticed. Naturally, Mum let out a yelp. She got such a shock that she dropped the vacuum. Slowly bending down to retrieve it, she completely locked eyes with the young, almost emaciated child who had suddenly appeared in her home. Who the hell was he? How had he gotten in? Was he ill? Lost? He looked a little frightened. Heart hammering, she stole a glance down towards the vacuum. Quickly she picked it up, and he was gone. Just like that. Gone. Terrified, and not to mention heavily pregnant, she peeked down the stairs. Nothing. He couldn't have gotten down all the stairs so quickly, she thought. Or so quietly. What the hell was going on? It only occurred to her later that the child of around 10 to 12 must have been the same one she'd seen walking past the kitchen a few weeks prior. Maybe she wasn't going mad. Mustering every ounce of courage, she briefly and tentatively checked the bathroom and 2 bedrooms, but the little boy had simply vanished. "Hello? Who are you?" Not a sound, apart from the TV downstairs where Dad was having lunch. Dad didn't quite know what to make of it. He believed her, though. You see, Dad had also had some experience with the supernatural. He worked for his father as an ironmonger in a town about 20 miles from our house. It was a very old listed building, a conservation building owned by the council. This meant that my grandfather rented the property. The shop had a ground floor where they sold tools, screws, hinges, and an upper floor which housed larger items for sale like lawnmowers. There was a door on the ground floor that opened into a room where they stored many different planks of wood and timber. They called it the timber room. This room had a door which opened out onto the street, but was long disused, locked for years, and inaccessible. This door used to be the door to an old apartment and blocked by the many pieces of timber being used and stored there. One other door at the back of the room remained locked that existed above the timber room. The apartment had been empty and derelict for years. One day Dad sat perched with his feet up in front of the door that linked the ground floor of the shop and the timber room. As he tucked into his sandwiches, an old man in an overcoat with a cap and white shopping bag in his hand walked past the door. He was actually inside the timber room, yet Dad hadn't seen him enter. In fact, he would have physically had to have moved out the way to let him in due to where he was standing. Now Dad thought this extremely weird and couldn't imagine how on earth this old geezer had gotten past him, but decided to allow the old guy to browse while Dad finished his lunch. He finished his sandwiches, had a quick gander at the newspaper and went into the timber room in a bid to assist the customer, who was nowhere to be seen. While Dad couldn't get his head round it, he even attempted to check the front and back doors of the room to no avail. They were totally hemmed in by large heavy planks of all different types of wood, not to mention they were locked. So he scratched his head and pondered for the next few hours, until Mary, one of the employees, came in for her afternoon shift. He relayed the story to her, and she gives him a wry smile. "Did he have a cap, overcoat and shopping bag?" she asked. Dad's jaw hit the floor. "Bloody hell, how'd you know about that?" "Oh, no worry, that's old Jock. Everyone knows about him. He's harmless, poor old soul. He used to live in the flat upstairs. Hanged himself up there a few years back. If you go to the flat, you can still see the rope hanging from the rafters." Well, you better believe that my dad spent the rest of the afternoon huffing and sweating and shifting plank boards of timber in front of that back door. My grandfather obviously had the key because he rented the space, but locating it wasn't easy. It was never used. After trying about 20 different ones, finally the lock clicked open. And when my dad gingerly climbed those stairs into the musty, bird-crap-caked ruins of the old apartment, there was indeed a solitary rope dangling from the ceiling. After Mum witnessed the little boy in the house that day, she didn't exactly see him again, but she felt him, or something like that. Often she'd feel eyes on her and fully expect to whirl around and be greeted with the sight of the waif-like blonde boy with the big blue eyes. Dad even claimed to feel and sense things, although I don't dispute that some of his experiences could have been attributed to some kind of mass hysteria by the phenomenon. But anyway, on frequent occasions, Mum would hear a kid's voice as she lay in bed. Sometimes it would wake her up. On a more than one occasion, she'd open her eyes, and in the dark, she'd see a childlike face hovering in front of her, which would then fade away. She'd feel pressure on the bed, like someone was sitting down or leaning on the mattress. I don't think she was ever truly scared, but definitely left her on edge. One time when I was a baby, I awoke crying in the night. My parents' bedroom was downstairs and mine up, so Mum got up and tended to me and tried to put me back to sleep. At this point my dad was awake. He was on his side of the bed facing the outside. I had quietened down, so naturally when Dad heard the footsteps enter his bedroom and the duvet cover pulled back, he felt the weight of something getting into bed. He assumed it was my mother coming back, when Dad turns around and sees a figure next to him for a split second, and at the same time he hears my mum shushing me back to sleep. Then the figure was gone, and there was no one else in the bed but him. Safe to say Dad did not get any sleep that night. So, were these occurrences and this activity ever explained? Well, partially. You see, when I was around 3 years old, our old neighbor from across the street introduced my mother to an old man by the name of Mr. Whitelaw. You see, he was actually born in our house. He was so excited and enthralled to see the old place again that he promptly and rather forwardly invited himself round for tea one day. I personally don't remember meeting him. I think I must have been in nursery. Mum said that after they had a cup of tea and a bite to eat, she showed him around the house. He marveled enthusiastically over all the changes and developments to the original layout and expressed his utmost joy at seeing all the original features, pointing out each and every one that my mum and dad had preserved and that he remembered fondly from his childhood. Now, I mentioned before that my mother is a very private lady, but at this point she decided to seize her moment. There was a question that she needed to ask this man. It was now or never, and she had to know. Mr. Whitelaw, I hope you don't mind me asking, and you may think me very foolish, but do you know of anyone who died in this house? Mr. Whitelaw promptly stopped in his tracks and stared intently at my mother. Why do you ask that, my dear? He asked with a soft smile touching the corners of his mouth. Mum explained that she had seen a mysterious young boy on a few occasions in and around the property. What did he look like? Can you describe him to me? So, my mother described the young boy thin, very pale and gaunt, timid, of around 10 to 12, with big blue eyes and a beautiful blonde head. What happened next? My mother told me she'll never forget. Mr. Whitelaw's eyes took on a slight glassy look, and the soft smile slipped away slowly. Wistfully he said, "You've just described my brother James to an absolute T. He was ill, you know, died during a flu epidemic in the days of World War I. He was my older brother. I was only 3 or 4 when he died, but I still remember him clearly. He was actually aged around 13 or 14, but looked younger due to him being poorly most of his life. Oh, but he loved this house. He would play hide and seek with me on the stairs. Thank you, dear. Thank you for showing me around my childhood home and for all the happy memories." Sadly, Mr. Whitelaw passed away a few weeks later. My mum never saw James again, but growing up there were many strange occurrences in that big old house, too many to explain. But when a door would open randomly or we'd hear an odd noise, my family members and I got into the habit of saying, "Come in, James," or "Stop playing with the light switch, James," or even, "James, please stop running up and down the stairs." I don't recall ever being scared growing up in that house, but it was just something we were used to. There was a sort of atmosphere. Visitors would sometimes sense it, but it was never ominous. That is until I turned about 16 to 17 years old. I have a large extended family, and most weekends we had cousins and friends to stay overnight. But one of my younger cousins, although she enjoyed visiting us, would never stay. Refused point blank. And she would never go into my room unless she absolutely had to. One day my mother was visiting my aunt, that is my mum's sister, the mother of said cousin. Now growing up, this cousin claimed to see the spirits of dead people and used to complain that they'd keep her up all night. None of us ever made a big deal out of it because she didn't either. She just took it all in her stride. So my mum and aunt are talking, and the subject of James and ghosts and our haunted house come up. Mum conveys that she really feels that her and Dad's room is the centre of the activity, and my cousin overhears and snorts and huffs, shaking her head and laughing. Both my mum and aunt stop talking and look at her questioningly. Bemused, "It's definitely not your room," she says to my mum. "It's Sheryl's room that's the problem, i.e., my room." Needless to say, no one told me this, because I was about to find out for myself. I met my husband when I was 15. After a couple of years of flirting, hooking up at parties, etc., we began steadily dating when I was 17 and he 18. My parents loved him, and we were fairly liberal. They would allow him to stay over, but only if he slept in a made-up bed on the floor in my room. Very trusting, I know. However, one night, one of my female friends was staying too. So she and I slept in my bed, and my husband slept on the floor. We all drifted off, and I had just fallen into a deep sleep when I was jolted awake by my husband. He was sitting bolt upright and punching me in the back, frantically shouting that something or someone had grabbed his feet and hovered over his face. He felt like he was suffocating. Now, I must state here that my guy is honestly one of the most sensible, composed, and skeptical people I know. As a couple, we are total opposites, and they do say opposites attract. Hence, this uncharacteristic behavior of him really alarmed me. Fair enough, we'd probably been to the pub that night, and yes, there are people listening who will attribute this to sleep paralysis, but all I know for sure is that he was absolutely petrified, convinced that something had attacked him. He described waking up because he felt something grab at his feet and ankles, holding them down. Then he saw a dark figure bending over him and felt he couldn't breathe. That's when he began to call on me, and finally sat up thrashing. The only way I could stop him from fleeing the house and walking the 2 miles home at 4 a.m. in the morning was to get down on the floor and hug him tightly. He held on to me like his life depended on it, and I swear, I thought his heart was going to burst out of his chest. I've been married to this man for 15 years now, and I've never seen him act like that since. It scared him crapless, and it scared me too. Next morning at breakfast, he described what had happened to my mum. She just stared back at him slack-jawed. "The same thing happened to me 2 nights ago," she said. "A dark figure leaning over me. I had such a feeling of dread and felt like I couldn't breathe or move." My husband also said that one night, after I'd had a party when my parents were away on holiday, he was sitting by himself in the living room, finishing his drink, and he witnessed a glass move across the table. Then he heard a noise like someone was flicking and pinging all the glasses in the room that were sitting out on the tabletops. My husband also grew up in a very old house, one much larger than ours. It even had an old servants' quarter area, and he witnessed a woman in a large grey bustling dress walk straight past him and through a wall. Recounting all of these experiences and writing them down has admittedly taken a lot longer than I originally thought it would. I do have other stories, but I'll save them for another time. But before I wrap this one up, I have one more event I'd like to share, and it relates to the seemingly ominous presence that inhabited our old house after young James had made himself scarce. One night when I was around 16 or 17, my parents attended a party at a neighbor's house. My younger brother was staying with cousins, and never one to miss an opportunity, I invited round 5 or 6 friends to play our guitars and have a bit of a jamming session. We were in mixed company, male and female. One of my female friends was upset because her boyfriend and her had broken up, so I suggested that she stay over for the night. She agreed, and as it approached about 11 p.m, the rest of the gang called for taxis, and one by one, I let them out the front door. Now, the staircase is at the front door, end of the hall, and the living room is at the opposite end. Our landline telephone, in the days when mobile phones weren't about, was on a small table in the hall, right next to the door to the living room. A potted houseplant sat next to the telephone table. My friend asked to use the telephone to let her folks know that she was staying over. And here's where something happened that affected me profoundly, so much that I'm sharing it with a bunch of strangers 25 years later. Just as my friend, still sobbing over the breakup, hung up the phone, an almighty bang came from upstairs, shaking the house slightly. Horrified, my friend began to panic. "It's okay," I laughed. "It's just one of the doors upstairs slamming shut. Someone must have opened a window. That can happen if there's a draft." I smiled at her and put my hand on her arm. She was still pretty upset. Then bang. Again, her eyes opened so wide I could see the whites all around her pupils. In fright, my fingers unintentionally dug into the flesh of her forearm. "Don't worry, it's just the other doors." But this time I wasn't so sure. There were only 3 doors upstairs. Remember the layout I described? Bathroom, bedroom, bathroom? Well, the thing that was bothering me was the fact that we didn't have twisty doorknobs upstairs. The 3 doorknobs had handles, with long horizontal levers that you have to physically push down to open and close. And once the doors slammed, they were closed. Window draft or not, those doors would not open again unless the handles were pushed down. We were just getting organized to get settled into the living room and watch a film when another bang happened, and my friend lost it. I tried to calm her down and told her it was okay. I said it was probably one of our mates who had perhaps stayed behind and were playing a really crappy joke on us. All the while I'm thinking, 3 slams. If I hear another, I'm going to lose my mind. Plus, I couldn't work out how a drafty window and ROM room could cause all 3 doors to slam. I didn't like this. This was my house. I was supposed to feel safe here. I wished my parents were home. My dad would know what to do. He always did. Heart pounding, I tentatively walked down the hall to the foot of the stairs and peered up into the darkness. "Aye, aye, very good. Who's the smart-ass, eh? Not funny, guys, not cool. You better come down right now, because if my folks find—" And then it happened. As clear as day. I heard one of the doors from upstairs slam hard. Mentally trying to do the maths and work out how the hell there could have been another bang, my thought process was interrupted by the most guttural, loudest, menacing growl from the top of the staircase. My friend screamed. I jumped and noped right out of the hall and into the living room as fast as I could with my friend on my heels. We slammed the living room door shut, leaving on the hall light, staring at each other, breathing heavily, my friend in tears. We just asked ourselves over and over, what the hell just happened? I honestly don't know how long we were there for, but I practically had to beg my pal to stay with me, as she was truly terrified. I reckon it was about 45 minutes to an hour later that I decided to try and pull the landline phone into the living room, stretch the flex cord under the door. I knew it would reach. I'd seen my mum do it loads of times. And I honestly can't tell you how much I was totally crapping myself, and I opened that door into our hall. Shooting out, I grabbed the landline, tried desperately to unravel the flex, and pull it into the living room. When I crap you not, another door got slammed, and a loud, raspy, sinister demonic growl emanated from the top of the stairs. I yanked the phone into the living room, got the cable caught on the houseplant, knocked it over, and spilled soil all over the carpet. But I didn't care. I wanted the door between myself and the hall space closed. When I finally managed it, I honestly could have wept myself with relief. My friend was wrecked by now. It was too late to call any of our friends. Their parents would go mad. So I decided to call the neighbor's house where my parents were spending the evening. But alas, no answer. They were clearly having a better night than us. So we sat there just freaking out for the next few hours. I went over it in my head. My brother had a few toys that made noises when you pressed them, but even then, they'd need to be activated to go off. At the end of the day, no matter which spin I put on it, in my heart of hearts I knew that what we'd heard was no bloody children's toy. Raiding my parents' drinking cabinet did help take the edge off. Call it Dutch courage, but when we could no longer keep our eyes open, I decided, stuff this, I want to go to bed. I crept to the bottom of the stairs, this time finding the courage to flick on the staircase light. Nothing. No sound apart from the whoosh of my heart in my ears. My friend was behind me, sticking to me like glue. Eventually we crept up the stairs, pausing on each step, listening intently, and braced, ready to bolt at a moment's notice. However, we reached the top unscathed, and I very bravely opened all the doors, as all 3 were indeed firmly closed over, and flicked on the lights. Then my friend and I scurried into bed and huddled close under the covers. We were still awake when my mum came in half an hour later. inquiring about the mess in the hall. I apologized and blurted everything out. Mum looked at us with sympathy and exasperation. "I'm going to have this house blessed," she stated, and then bid us goodnight. I don't recall if she ever did, but nothing as menacing as that ever happened again. Just the usual phenomena like faint voices and footsteps and odors. I did love that house where I grew up. In fact, my husband and I bought it from my parents when we got married, and neither of us have had an unpleasant experience after we moved in. We have since sold it, as we needed more space to accommodate our family and life, but occasionally I do miss it. I think it's because of where I grew up, and because of all the happy memories I have whilst living there, that it reminds me of my dad. We both used to sit in the corner of the living room and listen to his old 1970s Elton John vinyls. Regrettably and sadly, Dad passed away 4 years ago, and it still hurts every day. My children swear that they still hear his spirit walking around when they stay overnight with my mum, and my 8-year-old daughter is sure she heard him call her name. I do hope that's true. I used to live in an 110-year-old house in San Jose with a few buddies of mine. We'd hear stories from contractors that were preparing the house for renters after the old lady had gone senile and had been transferred to a nursing home. Things like footsteps upstairs when no one was home, and the electrician was in the basement. Hollow noises where noises shouldn't come from. Well, about 3 months after we moved in, we were startled by apparent heavy footsteps coming up the wooden stairs from the street. Thinking it was one of our roommates coming home early, we would open the door to greet him, but no one was ever there. I can't stress that enough. Yet, the best would come almost a year and a half later. I was splitting the front room with my friend, and late one night at about 3:30 a.m., I awoke to the right side of my futon depressing, and the wooden part of the futon creaking very loudly, as if an extreme weight had been set on it. This was compounded by the fact that my whole left side on the futon I had been sleeping on lifted in the air about 6 inches. Yeah, it was dead quiet, and all the hairs on my body went up as the air got noticeably colder. I was sleeping towards the wall for 2 very long minutes. I tried to get myself to face whatever it was that was causing my whole bed to raise up. Let me tell you, to even get that futon to creak, you'd have to jump up and down on it with significant weight. Just the way it was creaking sounded like 300 pounds were being focused on one point. Whatever it was dissipated into thin air as my bed slowly went back down again. I woke up to a depression on my right side of the futon, something that I also cannot stress enough would take a lot of weight to do, as it was a very firm futon mattress. It gets better. My roommate was awake the whole time and heard the exact same thing I did at the same time I told him it happened at. He never opened his eyes either, as he thought it was just me shifting the bed around. After this, it never happened again, but I could totally tell it was something in the house finally trying to connect with us. And it took all the energy it could in the room to get the point across. Even when I see the house today, it still freaks me out. This happened around 2009 to 2010, in the Thumb region of Michigan. One of my good friends bought a huge Italianate farmhouse in 1876. Well, naturally, we explored the house. It sat empty for a long time. We found a dried-up cistern under the floor, but it was filled with children's shoes. That was creepy, but whatever. When we started to demo, that is when things began to happen. Nothing crazy, but the lights would turn on even though we knew for a fact we turned them off, and the doors would slam. My friend put some crosses up in the house, and whatever was in that house did not like them. They would get knocked off the walls almost every night, and we began to hear footsteps. The final straw was when this thing started growling into my buddy's ear when he was sleeping. He left the house right there and then. I've never seen him scared before, as he's a bigger guy and not easily frightened. My friend ended up moving out completely that day and listed the house. Hey guys, it's Mort here, and thank you so very much for listening. I really enjoyed tonight's Haunted House stories. I'm always a sucker for ghosts, and I am so happy that the app is almost ready. I just want to remind everyone that if you sign up and have a Android phone, you can actually, use the app straight away, and you get loads of cool perks for signing up early. So please, give it a think. It's not that much money to contribute and get the app for free. I think the minimum is £5. So yeah, it would really mean the world to us. So give it a think. Yeah, I hope you guys don't get annoyed at me saying this, but yeah, it's just we've worked on this for so long, and so hard. I think what we're really trying to do is just make it so that when you get the app, you either pay a really small monthly usage fee, like 79p, really small. That's less than a biscuit in Starbucks. Or just a one-off payment, one time. I think it was like $7.99 or something. Maybe it's even less, I can't remember, but one-time payment, and you get it, free forever, and we're going to just keep updating it, and you get literally like 2,500 stories. And it's only going to keep growing. Ad-free forever. I mean, that's definitely a whim, right? So I really hope you like it. It will definitely keep a lot of you guys entertained. The nights I don't upload, when you don't want something new, when you want something old. And it just has so many cool features, some secret features as well, that we'd love for you guys to find out about. But we've worked really hard on this, and we really want to present it in the best light, and we really just want to do some final touches to make it perfect. So yeah, I'm not super good at being salesy, but I really hope that the ones of you who do want to support the campaign appreciate how much this really means to me and Craig. So thank you guys, and if you're listening, Craig, thank you. Your work has been amazing. Thank you. So there you have it. I'm just really excited. I hope you guys like it. You don't have to donate to get the app. It will be available later, like I said. But, this is the way you get it early. You get perks for signing up. And yeah. All right then. I know you're going to get bored and stop listening soon. So I'm just going to wrap things up. Thank you everyone so much for listening. It really does mean the world. And I hope that you enjoy the app and today's stories. Link in bio in the description if you want to check it out. Thank you so much. Stay awesome. Thank you to my members and patrons. You guys are amazing. A lot of your money has actually helped fund the app. Stay awesome, and I'll see you in the next one.